Howdy folks, welcome to another beautiful day out here in West Vancouver. In today's video we're going to talk about a newly proposed bill by the British Columbia government to make it easier for internationally trained professionals to work in British Columbia in their professions. Bill number 38 of 2023 is called the International Credential Recognition Act, and it's to solve a problem that's been existing in British Columbia for a while. And that is to get your credentials recognized so that you can work in your profession in British Columbia. Just to give you an example, I was chatting to a South African doctor a while ago, and he was saying that British Columbia used to source most of their, or at least a third of their doctors from South Africa, or well, a large part of their doctors from South Africa for many years. And then suddenly it changed because they changed the credential recognition process and made it almost impossible for a South African doctor to have their credentials recognized. Not impossible in the sense like you can't, you can, but you have to take such a big step back and do stuff over, and it's so expensive that by the time people don't want to do it. It's just not worth their while to actually do it. So they lost a large influx of doctors from South Africa. Those doctors go to Alberta and other places in Canada, but not to British Columbia. And there's a huge doctor shortage at the moment, actually, to be honest. Anyway, that's just one of them. There was issues with certain engineering directions where you have to have 2 years of Canadian work experience before they would recognize your credentials. And that is just this big, giant catch-22. So you're a highly trained professional, you arrive in British Columbia, but now you can't work in your profession. You need to first do 2 years of just random crappy work so that you can have 2 years worth of Canadian work experience, and then you can have your credentials recognized. As you can imagine, for a lot of people, that's just not a viable option. People are just not going to do that. I'm not going to be an engineer and then wait, or a doctor and then wait to get my credentials recognized. So in that way, they've actually stopped a lot of professionals from coming through to British Columbia. Another one that was an issue was language testing. So there's been a lot of extra requirements. I mean, you've already done a language test to come through to Canada, and now they require more and more language testing, which is expensive. And anyway, long story short, the British Columbia government has tabled this bill to say that they are going to start regulating these regulatory bodies that do the accreditations. And these regulatory bodies need to make sure that their assessment processes are fair and fast. So just to give you some of the ideas, there's 29 different professions, including architects, early childhood educators, lawyers, natural resource professionals, paramedics, teachers, and veterinarians. And they fall under 18 different regulatory bodies. And the government is putting some rules in place for these regulatory bodies. Some of the rules are, there's a broad fairness mandate. You have to be fair. You can't just be like an enormous amount of red tape for no reason. So you have to be fair in making sure that you give people credit and accredit their qualifications if their qualifications are good and if they're trained in a decent place. The other thing is determinations must be made within a reasonable time, so no longer than any period prescribed by the minister, and it must be communicated to the applicant within 14 days of the determination being made, because that's another problem that people had, is they just wait forever to find out what's going on. They totally scrapped the requirements for Canadian work experience because they were like, well, that's just stupid. Why must you have Canadian work experience if to come and work in British Columbia? It's just, anyway, so they totally scrapped that, except unless an exemption is granted. So they can grant an exemption. Regulatory authorities cannot request new language testing if language test results has been done in the last 5 years and was submitted with their application. And the information regarding international credential assessment process must be published on the websites of the regulated authorities. including the certification requirements, the criteria assessment, and the review or appeal processes. So in other words, what they're saying is you need to make it transparent so that people can see what it is that they need to do and that they can track their processes. It's an interesting bill. I mean, the reality is that apparently in these 29 professions, we will, according to the British Columbia government, the expectation is that we would need about 1 million professionals in the next 10 years to fill those positions in British Columbia. And there just isn't enough local people to do it. So they are expecting at least 1/3 of those 1 million people to be immigrants. And that's why they want to move this big obstacle out of the way to get the big professional guys in. You know, and I mean, it does make sense to a large extent. If you've got a highly trained doctor in South Africa that's doing really well, he wants to come to Canada. I mean, South African doctors see more trauma in a week than a Canadian doctor sees in a year, most likely. He wants to come to Canada, but he needs to take such a big step back and start afresh and do so much that he's not going to come through. And I mean, those are the people that you want, the people that have got the skill sets and the training. Anyway, so we'll see how it goes. I think they're going to be voting on the bill in March, and it should go through. But yeah, if you're a professional and you want to come work in Canada or in British Columbia, apparently it's going to get easier soon. All right, folks, have a good one. Cheers.